I'm on the air. In order to get the artboard to fit to the window, again, that keyboard command was Command 0. So if you guys have the same thing where it's sort of offset, you can just click on Command 0, and it'll fit to the artboard so you can see everything. But the first thing I want to do is show my rulers. Anyone remember the keyboard command for show rulers? Command R, that's right. Full lights off here. Command R. So everyone go ahead and hit Command R if your rulers aren't already showing. If they were showing, you would have turned them off with that same keyboard command. You'd have to hit it again to bring them back. So the first thing I'd like you to do is zoom into the top edge of your pawn using the zoom tool. And you'll see this is kind of a sketchy line here. I didn't actually sketch this out by hand. I used Illustrator sketching tools, but used the brush tool that gives a bit of a hand-drawn quality. And we'll be having some fun with these complex tools in the next couple of weeks, over the next couple of weeks. But for now, we're just going to focus on the 3D stuff. So if you've zoomed into the area, what I'd like you to do is just take a guideline, and again, to create a guide, you simply click and drag from the edge of the ruler out. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see here. Is that not working it's not working, right?
It's not.
Because it's locked. Thank you, Cynthia. I appreciate you helping me out there. A template file, a template layer, I'm sorry, by default is locked when you first start off, right? So the first thing we need to do is create a new layer that we can actually work with. And I'm going to do that by clicking on the Create New Layer button in the Layers panel. And I'm going to change the name of that because it's always good to name your layers for reference to Pawn.
You want us to keep that sketch layer locked?
Yeah, go ahead and leave that locked so it doesn't move around on you. It's just going to serve as a template for our design here. Okay. So now we actually have a layer that we can draw on. So now that guideline that I was hoping you guys would drop onto the screen should work, and you can see if I click from the ruler out to my the line, and it's not going to be exactly on the line because this is kind of a hand sketch line, but right near the edge is perfect. That's going to serve as our starting point. So I'm going to zoom out for just a second and show you guys. This is a relatively complex shape. What tool are we going to use, do you think, to draw this here? What's that? Pen tool, right? You could go in and start doing a bunch of shapes, like an ellipse here and a triangle there. You could piece it together using solid shapes, but obviously for something like this, the pen tool is going to be a lot more effective. But again, it is going to take a little practice, so we're going to go through the pen tool drill here, and also I'm going to try to mention the keyboard commands that I'm using, and also of course they're going to display on screen. But the first thing I'm going to do is going to zoom back into that area where I was earlier so I can see in greater detail. And I'm going to hold the Command Shift key command and drag a marquee with the zoom tool to get in a little closer. Okay. And my starting point is going to be right on that blue line. And the first thing I'm going to do is click and drag outward to the left, holding the Shift key down. Now, can anyone tell me the benefit of holding the Shift key down in that instance? Any ideas?
Line straight.
To keep it straight, exactly. You guys probably know with all the design work that you've been doing, when you hold the Shift key down, it constrains either 90 or 45 degree angles. And so we've created a line that's straight. And you notice I didn't go all the way out to the edge. I'm just redrawing here. It's not going to be perfect. You can always go in and make adjustments afterwards. But I haven't clicked again or anything. I've just clicked one time, and I drug that line out. And now I'm going to click right here at the apex of this curve. And again, holding the shift key down, I'm going to click and hold the shift key down and just drag a little bit until I get a bit of a curve. Okay? Now, you notice my sketch line disappeared. I bet yours did too. Anyone know why that happened? Oh, by the way, you have to click first and then hit the shift key. You have to click first and then hit the shift key while the mouse button is held down. And let me show you why here with that pen tool. If I hold the shift key first and try to click right on that point, what do you guys think happened there? I held the shift key down first and then clicked. Any ideas on what happened there?
You kind of made a copy or something?
Well, no. You know what happened is this is exactly 45 degrees from that original point. And since I held the shift key down first, it positioned that click at 45 degrees from this originating point. So what you want to do is click first, and I'm still holding the mouse down. See my red dot there is indicating that my mouse is still down. Then I hold the shift key down, and I can drag to precisely position that anchor point where I want it, and still have some control over the handles that I pulled out. So does everyone kind of have this? Something going on similar to this now? Now, my sketch line disappeared, and it disappeared because my object is filled with white. You see that? Everyone have the same thing? So while my line is selected, and while yours is selected, go ahead and hit the None button to make the fill transparent, or to eliminate a fill from the object. And now we can see our sketch line, and you can see that my curve did not follow my original design exactly. And that's okay. I'm going to continue on because I can always go back and refine it. We're going to do that with this, okay? So the next point, I think I'll be able to get away with this segment here by simply clicking right in that next corner, and sure enough, that looks pretty good. I'm kind of liking where that's going there. So I'm going to leave that the way it is, and then I'm just going to, this is a straight line here, so I don't have to hold the shift key down because it's not 45 degrees. I can just click out here, and it's going to create that next line.
Did you say you don't hold the shift key?
Correct.
Because mine came out as a curve when I did that.
You might have been holding down something else, like the Option key. So does everyone kind of have, we created this first curve here, and you ended it there, right? And now I've just clicked one time without holding any keys onto that next point.
Can you
Okay.
see, please?
Okay. Okay, that's fine. Go ahead and continue with that. We'll refine that later. This way we can keep moving with the lesson. Okay. So the next point we're going to do without creating any handles is simply click on this corner now again. Okay. So I've got that nice little right angle that's being rendered in there. Well, I've moved my mouse away from this anchor point, and I realized the next thing I want to create is a curve, right? So I can click on that, or when I hover over that anchor point, you see that I get the Convert Anchor Point icon next to my mouse point. So Illustrator is going to give me the ability to convert this point into it's going to give me the option to convert the anchor point, so I can actually create another handle from that. And you'll see what I mean by simply clicking on that and dragging out. Look at that. It's not drawing anything. It's actually creating a handle right from that anchor point. That's why I said early on that this pen tool is pretty tricky. There's a lot of little fancy stuff that goes on with it. And all I've done is created a handle that comes out here that's going to start my curve. similar to that first one that I did when I started this shape. Now, near the middle of this apex of this curve again, I'm going to click and drag holding the shift key down. And I clicked first, and then I drug the and then I held the shift key down, and then I drug the handle outward to have a smooth curve going into the next segment. So you can see all of you guys should be, some of you guys I think are jumping ahead, but here we are, we've got this curve, and my line is ready to continue. I'm going to go right into this corner here and just simply click and drag. And now you see what I have here? Okay. Now, Robin, this is going to help you out with your situation from earlier. And if I were to try and draw this next segment of line, which is pretty long, and I'm zoom out, hitting the Command minus key a couple of times so I can see more of this. It's pretty big. I'm going to go one more time. There we go. Now I can actually see this edge here. If I were to try to draw this with my handle moving inward like that, this line is going to try to curve around because this handle is pulling that outwards, okay? And I'm going to demonstrate that by actually trying to click near the middle of this curve and then stretching it out. And you see what I did there? And Robin, this is why I said you can always fix this later, because I can fix this now. And if you guys have done the same thing, it's okay. It's a pretty easy fix because you can always change the angle of a handle by using the control point conversion tool. Well, what does that mean? You can get to it by simply holding the Option key down, and you'll see that my mouse has completely changed into the convert anchor point tool, and now when I click on the end of that handle and drag it out, you can see it's actually following its own contour. It's not locked to the linear position of that previous handle on the other side of the anchor point.
So is that the only way to do it?
That's really the best way. Yeah, sure. If you've done that, absolutely. That's the most efficient way. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to I'm going to stretch this. I'm going to move this anchor point because I kind of went to the middle here. I'm going to move this anchor point all the way to this corner here. Now, before you go and click on any of the selection tools up here, you really want to avoid that. And I know we talked about this. It's been a few weeks since we probably really practiced with the pen tool. But you want to avoid clicking on the selection tools because when you click on it, what it does is it disconnects. Illustrator says, oh, the next time you use the pen tool, you want to start a whole new line. Okay? And so I'm going to show you the keyboard shortcut to get right to your selection tools from the pen tool. So you see here, I'm on the pen tool. You can see my pen tool icon is on the screen. If I hold the Command key down, you'll see that my icon turns into the selection tool. But that's not what I want. I don't want the full selection tool because all I want to do is move this tiny little anchor down to this spot. It's already drawn. I just want to move it. And if I used my selection tool, it would move the entire object that I've drawn so far. So without ever leaving the pen tool, I can switch back and forth between my selection tool and direct selection tools by simply, and it's a big keyboard command, so bear with me, you hold down the Command key, and I usually do it with my thumb at the same time. You also hold down the Option key, okay, and then hit the Tab key, and I usually hit the Tab key with my left pointer finger. And when I do that, look at now my arrow has turned into the direct selection tool, and I did all that without ever leaving the pen tool. So now that I have the direct selection tool, and I'm still holding the Command key down, You can now when I toggle back and forth, it's the direct selection tool. Now I can click right on that point and drag it down to the spot that I wanted it to be, and now I don't have an anchor point in the middle there.
No.
Now,
Oh.
why do you think I went through all that exercise? Instead of just leaving that anchor point in the middle, why do you think I decided to move it down here and not have an anchor point in the middle? What's that? Exactly. The less lines or the less anchor points that you use for an object that you're drawing with the pen tool, the smoother it's more likely going to be. Okay, it's just going to have a better fidelity in terms of the roundness of the curves that you're creating. Yes.
Am I on it?
So you don't really care if we're right on the line for this one?
I did.
No, you don't have to be right on the line.
Command Option Tab, and I get this.
Oh, okay. So who else when they hit Command Option Tab is getting the application screen? Is everyone else? So you might have missed it in a class about that. We turned off that setting in the operating system. This was a couple of weeks ago. That's probably why the rest of the machines are set up this way. But for now, why don't you go ahead and click on the direct selection tool, and then click on that point and move it down to that corner. And then we'll go ahead and make the adjustment from there. So you can see that I don't quite have the curve following that line very closely. It's a little flat. And all I need to do is move the handle by clicking on one of the control points for the handle and simply slide this upward to adjust that curve so that it's pretty close to my original
Okay,
line.
how do I
Yes?
get a handle?
Yeah, you have to click on the point.
Well, no,
Yes,
because
Alicia?
I'm
Yeah, because your whole thing is selected. Try deselecting it first. Yeah, and then go ahead and go in there. Oh yes, Robin.
We went to the direct selection tool, so it's no longer connected. How do I reconnect it?
We'll work on that afterwards. You can continue your line because you can always do adjustments after your stuff is drawn. Okay. So let's go ahead and continue from where we're at. Robin, please avoid interrupting the lessons while we're moving forward. We need to keep a pace so we can get on with the 3D stuff. After when we move, if you'd like to just watch the lesson, then I can come back and assist you once we start rendering the 3D stuff. Okay, so with this next section here that I've got, I'm going to take the Option key, hold it down like we did earlier. I'm going to click on that anchor point and change the direction of my of the next curve that's coming. And I did that by dragging the handle in a different direction. So now when I click in that corner again, you can see, oh, I was pretty close actually. Just by eyeballing it, I was able to get that line to follow my original curve pretty well. So now I've got this next anchor point checked in there, and again I'm going to click on it. Notice my pen tool here is changing to the convert anchor point tool again, right? So I can just click on that and drag again to create that next curve, and now again I eyeballed it pretty well at this stage. Okay, now I've just got the easy part left to do. I'm going to hold the Shift key down so I can create a flat base, and now I've got a pawn, half of a pawn shape that's just been rendered using lines. Okay, the key thing for what we're going to do today using the 3D tool is that this point here, the one on the top, and the one on the bottom need to be in exactly the same position vertically. Okay? Otherwise, when we go to what's called revolve this element, it may not work correctly. So I'm going to do that by zooming in, and again holding the Command Spacebar key down. I am going to drag a marquee pretty close to that to that anchor point, so I can zoom in real tight, and you can see indeed I did not get right on it when I drew it. So I'm going to click on the direct selection tool in my menu bar, not the selection tool, but the direct selection tool. And by clicking on it and clicking away from my object, I can go back and click on that anchor point, hold the shift key down so that it snaps right to that line, and the word intersect should appear when I do that. Okay. I'm going to hit Command 0 to fit my artboard, and I'm going to do the same thing with the top anchor point. Yep, that one wasn't right on the line either, so I'm going to click on that with the direct selection tool, just on that point, not my whole shape. You want to be sure that your shape is not selected first, and then you go back and click on that anchor point with the direct selection tool. Okay? And I moved it over so that it snaps right to the anchor point. Now, this might not look perfect, and that's okay. We can always make the adjustments after the fact. Even after we've made it a 3D object, you can still go back in and adjust the shape of this object. It's pretty cool. So if it's not quite looking right, if you're not quite happy with it, that's okay. We can move on with the 3D rendering and continue with that, and you can still make adjustments after the fact. I am going to make this one change. I'm going to grab this handle. I use the direct selection tool, and I'm just going to take this handle and slide it back a little bit so that it's following my original contour a little better, and I'm going to take this one and move it up just a smidge. So now it's pretty close. I mean, I'm actually happier with this line than my original. So that's the basics of creating a pretty complex shape, right? Using a series of clicks with the pen tool. But this is our starting point. The rest of it is going to get easier because Illustrator is going to be doing the work for you. Okay? All right. Now that we have our shape drawn, and the most important part of this drawing is making sure that these two anchor points, the top one and the bottom one, are exactly, vertically aligned, or horizontally aligned, I guess is what it really is.
And how did you do that?
By zooming in and adjusting the anchor point to my guide using the direct selection tool.
Direct selection.
Okay, so everyone should have a shape similar to this. It might be a little wonky here and there, but that's okay. We're ready to revolve our object and turn it into 3D. And this is all using just a simple line. It's pretty cool stuff. So using your selection tool, go ahead and click on the object so that the object is selected in its entirety. And then go ahead and click on the Effect drop-down menu item, and you see here we have an option that's called 3D. If you slide over to the Revolve feature and click on it, it'll bring up a dialog box that's ready to add the three-dimensional revolve effect to your object. Okay? The first thing I always do when I go into 3D mode, the first thing I always do is click on the preview button. It's the first thing I do. Oh, and these computers are slow. And look what I ended up with. Anyone else end up with the same thing?
I don't know what the hell mine is.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll fix that in a bit. All right. So some of you guys didn't even end up with a with a shape like this. You actually have a something slightly different. Now, for those of you that have something slightly different, if you notice, there's a lot of adjustments I can make in my 3D revolve options. One of those is the position or the side of my object that this object is going to get revolved around. So who knows a little bit about woodworking in here? Any woodworkers? Anyone ever work on a lathe? Where you have where you stick like a cylindrical piece of wood or even a square piece of wood, right? And it spins around, and you take some tools and you carve. Well, that's exactly what Illustrator's doing with this. It's taking that profile of our object, and it's revolving it around an axis. And in this case, by default, it's revolving it 360 degrees so that it makes what appears to be like a solid shape. Now, right now, this is rendering from the left edge of my object, and that's why it looks this way. If I switch this over to right edge, and for those of you guys that are getting a cylinder, you might be seeing something different.
Yeah, I'm getting
There we
cylinder.
Everyone switch over to right edge. Switch over to right edge.
Where's right edge?
That's just great.
What did I get?
So, now, you see what we got? Now we're pretty close. We've got this black pond. Now, some of you guys who are getting a cylinder, what's probably causing that is maybe one of your points, this one perhaps, is not perfectly aligned with the bottom point. That's probably what's happening if you're getting a cylinder. That's why I had you guys draw this guideline here, so that these 2 points you can make sure they were perfectly aligned. Because if one of these points is hanging just a little bit over, that edge is going to drop straight down, and it's going to revolve that edge as a solid surface and create what looks like a cylinder. So let me see if I can replicate what some of you guys with cylinders might be experiencing. I'm going to go ahead and click OK so that I have my 3D object. As I mentioned earlier, and everyone go ahead and, if you've rendered your object by clicking OK, go ahead and click on the View button and go to Outline. And notice our artwork is still there. It hasn't changed. It's an effect that's been applied to this simple, well, not so simple, but this line shape. Bless you. Okay? Now let's see if I can replicate this cylinder issue that some of you guys were having. I'm going to take this top point and slide it over so it's not aligned with my bottom point anymore. Okay? Now when I go back to my standard preview mode, and I click on my object, I'm just going to do this real quick and open my 3D options up again and go to left edge, the way you guys kind of had it before, but the default. Well, no, still looks pretty good. It's just kind of wonked out. Might have been the bottom one that was causing that. Or, let's see, if it was an open cap, could that be the reason? Boy, this thing moves slow.
Do you know
Yes,
what?
Craig.
I've got this like gray band. Do you know what that's about? Is that?
Yes. Actually, I don't know what's causing it. It almost looks like it has a wrong shape on it. But, you know, it might be, I got to tell you guys, these iMacs are moving slow on this stuff. This is processor intensive. So your Mac might really be getting its horsepower pushed here. And maybe if it's having a hard time creating the shape exactly. Now, Craig and whoever else might be having these, I see, Brownie, you've got a little bit of a lightened kind of thing in the middle. You might want to go in there and see if maybe you have a gap in your path, like it's not actually solid. I mean, there's all sorts of little things that, you know, could be that there's a slight curve in there, and Illustrator is rendering that curve slightly different. But, you know, at this stage, it's really not so critical that this is picture perfect yet. Because as you see, as I showed you just by going into outline view, this is really a simple editable shape that you can still manipulate and refine to get it just the way you want it, okay? So I'm going to go back to right edge. I'm going to click OK. And I am going to move this line back so that it's right on my guide. Let me make sure of that. Yep, it's right on my guide. Good. That's where I want it. So now you can see I kind of have this pawn shape. Well, if you notice, it looks very black. Let me go back to my original. You notice the difference here? It's kind of a grayish. You can see more detail, even though it's not a black pawn. You can see more detail with some of these colors applied. Well, there's a lot of stuff that you can do with your artwork here. Because this is still vector artwork, you notice it's black because I have a black stroke applied to that artwork. If you were to change your black stroke to yellow or something else, you would end up with a yellow pawn. Because that yellow is actually creating the color on the surface of that object. The 3D effect is what's creating the highlights and the shadows. So what I did to create that grayish pawn where you can see the shapes a little bit better is I didn't use yellow or black. I used the gray to render the shade of my pawn, and my gray was about 70%. Okay, and now you can see. All right, well it's a gray pawn now, but now it looks really washed out and muddy, right? I like the color on that one there, Alexis. That looks nice. And it's washed out and muddy, and that's still not quite right. This one's nice and gray, but it has very dark shadows, very light highlights. So you can make adjustments to this after the fact. Not only can you manipulate the shape, but you can also continue to modify the 3D effects that are being applied to this object. Okay? And to do that, go ahead and open up your Appearance panel. You guys remember the Appearance panel? You guys were working on it quite a bit last week with applying multiple strokes, gradients, and fills. If you open up your Appearance panel, you can see here on mine that I have a revolve effect applied to this object. And I can open that effect back up simply by clicking on the 3D revolve text in the panel. And of course, I have to click on preview to see what I'm doing. And you'll notice that there's this button down here at the bottom that says More Options. If you click on More Options, it's going to bring up more options for the way you can control the lighting on your object. And so if you look, the shade of my color is black. And do you guys remember me early on telling you that sometimes if you try to print black, it's not as deep a black as you can possibly get by combining 4 colors? It was probably one of the things I talked about in the first couple of weeks, where when you're working with just 100% black, it's not nearly as deep and as rich as if you're working on a black that has some cyan, magenta, yellow in it as well. So that's how I got the shade to be much richer, is I clicked on the shading color, selected custom, okay? And by default, it changes my color to red. Illustrator and Photoshop do this often. They use red as a default whenever you try to customize a color. And they do that so that you can see a change. Most people don't use these bright reds in their designs, so you can actually see, oh, I just made that change. So you can click on this red icon to bring that up, and you can see right now this is 100% cyan, 100% magenta. I'm just going to click in the lower left bottom of this color picker here, and you'll see it's selected a black that has cyan in it, magenta in it, 66% yellow, and some black. And now when I click OK, you'll see that the shade on my object is indeed richer and darker because I've added a 4-color black to it. And at this stage, feel free to play around with the lighting. You can move this lighting around, the surface. This is actually like a light bulb shining on your artwork, and you'll see my highlight has moved over to the left side because I moved it over towards the left. And you can really control the light source for your design by modifying the position of your light points on the object. Yes,
How did you
Megan.
bring up the options again?
So what you want to do to bring that back up is you have to go to your appearance panel. If you click on your appearance panel, and again, the appearance panel, it's kind of a weird icon. It has a big circle with a bunch of dots around the perimeter. If you click on the appearance panel, do you have that open, Megan? And then you'll see 3D Revolve is one of the options that's available there. You can click on that and it'll open this dialog box right back up.
Okay, thank you.
Now, some of you guys have already messed around with the different positions that you can apply to the object, and there's all sorts of built-in ones. There's isometric left, which is one that I like to use because I kind of like isometric layouts. And you can see this rectangle here demonstrates what isometric is, basically. What you can do with this also is you can actually customize the angle of your object. You can either plug in the coordinates if you know exactly what you want them to be, but that's a little hard to figure out those three-dimensional coordinates in your head. You have to be pretty familiar with this Revolve 3D feature in Illustrator to kind of really get those memorized. But you can also click and drag this cube around different axes. I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but and that'll allow me to have manual control. So I'm going to click on this edge here, and I'm going to rotate that away from me a little bit, and you can see it goes temporarily into wireframe mode. And when I let go, it's actually removed that object in three-dimensional space based on what I clicked on. You can also completely revolve this object. If you hover over the front corner, you guys notice just by hovering just above this first corner here, I got a 4-directional arrow icon. If you use this, then you can completely move this object in any, oh gosh, this computer's so slow it's having a hard time rendering that. But you have full control as though you are just, that object is in a sphere and you have full control over what direction you want it to be positioned. Okay, a lot easier to do some of this stuff on a faster computer where it's working in more like real time. But I don't know what modifications I've made here, so I'm going to go back to isometric left and just leave it as is. And I'm pretty happy with this. The highlights are still a little dull, so I'm going to move my light point. Oh, there we go. Back over to the right, to the right side first of all. Okay. And I am going to change the intensity of my highlight to 100%, and that's going to make the highlight, the hot spot on my design, a lot brighter. So I've changed the highlight intensity to 100%. Now you can see that highlight is a lot brighter. And then in mine, I happen to change the highlight size to 100% also. Now, who on their design notices that there's some banding going on with this gradient? That doesn't look that good, huh? Most of the time you don't want banding in your artwork. So you can change that by modifying the number of steps that are blended between this color and the darkest color on your shape. Right now, Illustrator is only using, by default, 25 steps. So between this point here and the darkest point on the back side of your shape, there's only 25 shades of gray or shades of this color going into that. You can go up to 256. Okay, and that gives you a lot more detail. And you can either just type in the number, 256, or if you click on this arrow, you'll get a slider that allows you to manually change the position. Now, the reason that Illustrator doesn't by default give you 256, even though that's what most of us would want, is because it's more processor intensive. It's going to slow down your computer even more because now Illustrator is really having to work hard at rendering such a smooth three-dimensional object. But you notice now that I've done that, and I'm gonna add a little more black to my shade here. I clicked on that black icon, and I'm going to change the K value to 100% so that it is, it's pretty dark back there. And again, it's because I have 256 blend steps. It's taken a while to render here. I don't like the way that looks at all. Now, I don't know what's going on. Yeah, I'm going to go back a little bit then. I don't know why. Yeah, it's pretty much spot on.
Did you change highlight size?
I did. Ah, there we go. That's better. It didn't like that 100% black in there for some reason. That's interesting. I'm going to bring the ambient light down to 20%. And the ambient light is basically, imagine that there's light coming from all over this object because it's 3D. It's not just the spotlight. But in the real world, like me, right? Yeah, there's a big bright spotlight there that's creating this very harsh shadow behind me. But there's also ambient light coming in from the window there, from your monitors, and that's basically what the ambient light is. And I've changed my ambient light to 20, and now you can see I'm getting a much more sharper rendering with that object, and because I've got 256 blend colors, it looks pretty darn smooth. Okay? Any questions on that so far? The revolve feature is pretty cool. You can do a lot of stuff. You can make, obviously, if you envision this tool working in your mind, you can revolve any shape around itself and come up with some pretty elaborate designs. A lot of people like to do flower pots and things like that using this tool.
So do you always have to start with a half image
You do.
to make it work?
To make it work, yeah. You do, because it's going to revolve around. I mean, you can work with a full shape image, but it's going to take that full shape image and revolve it around the entire shape. So, if you want to create something that looks three-dimensional, like a cylinder, or in this case a pond, you want to start with a half shape and revolve that half shape to create your object. Now, just to show you guys a little technique here, I am going to duplicate this by clicking on my line and holding the Option key down. You remember the Option key creates a duplicate when I drag, and you'll see I now have two ponds. This is why I wanted to stay in isometric view. And when it's finished rendering, you'll see I have this other guy, but that doesn't quite look right. It looks like that pond is floating in space. I actually want that to be in the back, so I'm going to cut that by hitting Command X. Okay, and then I'll click on my original pond and then hit Command B for a quick paste and back option. And now you can see I've created an effect that makes it look like there's one pawn in front of the other. And boy, that's taken a while.
So you clicked on the red line, right?
Yes.
And
To-
then you did Option?
And then I did Command X and Command B.
No, just to get it, the second one.
Option, yes, to create the duplicate. That's correct. Click and drag with the Option key down. So you see now we actually look like there's something in three-dimensional space, right? We've got one, and then the effect of one being in front of the other adds that dimension of depth to my composition here. And I can take it one step further by making the one in the back a bit smaller, and I'm going to hold the Shift key down and click one of the corners, and I'm holding the Shift key down slightly, or I'm just going to move it slightly, and the Shift key down will constrain my proportion so that it doesn't distort my object. And when I let go, I should kind of have what looks like one pawn in front of the other in what I would consider kind of pretty realistic 3D. And if I turn off my background sketch, you can see what we've ended up with here. Okay?
Mine is adding points instead of letting me make a copy.
Are you on the pen tool? Because you're hovering over a line. Remember, whenever you hover over a line segment, Illustrator automatically wants to add a point. That's the default behavior for the line
How
tool.
do you grab the line then?
You have to use the selection tool, the same way you always move objects around with the selection tool. Tom?
I have a question. These aren't complete shapes, but they look like they're actually lines. So can you do that tool which sort of blends and the one that's gradient? You know, like
The blend tool?
the blend tool and the gradient tool. So like before we can have a gradient running through different
objects, yeah.
And also the blend one where it kind of changed from
One shape to another.
Can you use those on there even though they're not
Rendered 3D objects.
they're lines?
You should be able to. For this particular exercise on these computers, it would be pretty processor intensive to try to blend those two. I've never really tried blending two three-dimensionally revolved shapes.
I'm just wondering if you had one that was slightly smaller and one that was slightly bigger.
It's probably worth trying. And I know, as a matter of fact, this is one more thing I wanted to show you guys regarding the different shading modes for these 3D objects. I'm going to click on that first pawn that I had. And again, my appearance panel is open. And I'm going to click on 3D Revolve to bring up the options for the 3D effects applied to that. By clicking on Preview, I can see what I'm doing. Illustrator by default deselects the Preview button every time.
It does work. You can blend.
Great. One other feature that I wanted to show you guys is you can have there's 4 different types of surfaces that you can render on your 3D object. One of the coolest ones is the wireframe. If you click on wireframe, Illustrator will literally render the wireframe of your object in 3D, and then you can extrude, you can flatten the transparency on that, and actually turn this into vector lines that you can totally manipulate. A lot of people like using Illustrator's 3D to do that type of thing, to create the base object and then convert this all to outline, so you can go in and start doing custom colorization to that after the fact. It won't be 3D anymore, but if you're methodical in your design process. So if I click OK, my pawn will now be rendered in 3D as a wireframe object. It looks pretty cool that way. It looks like a very technical drawing. Okay. Any questions on that so far? There's a lot of stuff I threw at you, but it's all really under one process, that 3D process. Okay? And this is the 3D Revolve option. You can see, again, we took a profile of something, and it could be anything, and we simply revolved it around this axis, and it created the 3D object. Not quite right, that shape. Okay. Now we're going to do something a little bit different. There's another 3D option in Illustrator that's pretty cool, and that is the extrude and bevel 3D features in Illustrator. We haven't messed around with that yet. So if you'd like to keep this as a reference file for yourself, because if you want to play around with 3D on your own, go ahead and save this, and you can close it. It's taken a while to save. I'm sure yours are too, on these beasts. All right, there we go. All right, I've saved my file. Now I'm going to go ahead and close my file. I'm going to close this original pawn that I had created as well. Okay, so now we're back to a no document at all. And what I'd like to do is I'd like for you guys to create a new document separate. And the size can be the letter, vertical letter is fine if that's the default that you have. Again, this isn't the lab assignment. This is just to demonstrate Illustrator's other 3D features. Okay. So this time I want to demonstrate the coolness of the 3D feature by making a ring, a three-dimensional ring, okay? And to do that, I like the whistle there. Yeah, this is going to be awesome. A three-dimensional ring of fire. Sauron and Saruman's ring. All right. So to create my ring, the first thing I'm going to do is create a two-dimensional ring in Illustrator. Two-dimensional ring, right? Flat. Two-dimensional is flat. It doesn't have a three-dimensional look to it. And I'm going to show you the process, and by doing this, I'll also remind you guys the compound path features of Illustrator. Okay. So I've selected my ellipse tool, and you do that by clicking on your shape tool and then going out to ellipse tool. The keyboard shortcut for that, by the way, if you saw that, is the letter L. Also, the letter L will jump you right to the ellipse tool when you hit that. Okay. Now, I'm going to hover over my artboard, and I'm going to hold down the Option key. I want you guys to do the same. Hold down the Option key, and then hold down the Shift key right afterwards. I haven't clicked yet. And then I'm going to click and drag outward.
Why did we do the option shift?
Why did we do the Option Shift? Good question. Option, whenever you click Option, it draws an object from the center. It draws it from the center. By default, Illustrator draws it from the top left corner, or one of the corners, depending on the direction that you drag, right? But by default, Illustrator draws from up here. If I were to click there and drag, it would just expand my circle from that point out this way. By holding the Option key now, it draws from the center outward. The reason I added the Shift key to modify it is to constrain the proportions so that it's a perfect circle. If I wouldn't have held the Shift key down, and I can demonstrate, if I don't hold the Shift key down, it'll still draw out from the center, but you could end up with an oval or a less than perfect circle. I wanted to ensure that it was a perfect circle, and that's why I combined those two keys together. Okay, so now we have a circle, and then I'm going to click on that circle and make a copy of it. Okay, and to do that really quick, it's just Command-C, Command-F, which is copy and then paste in front. So Command-C, Command-F. It looks like nothing's changed, right? Because I have the exact same object, the same looking object on top of another. But while it's still selected, and if you have your bounding box shown, you can click on one of these corners and holding the Shift key down, move one of those corners, and you'll see I indeed have two different objects, one on top of the other. Now, that's not what I want. I'm trying to make a ring here, right? And I clicked on one corner and I drug it down, and now I have a circle that's not quite centered over the other one. Yes, Brianna.
Sorry, could you repeat the second circle?
The what? Oh, just click on the first one, Command-C, Command-F. Copy and then paste in front.
Wait, so select and then click on
So
it.
you have to select that first circle, then Command-C, Command-F. Okay. That's the keyboard shortcut, Command-C, Command-F. Did you click? Yep, there you go. You got it. Okay. Yeah.
So that's it?
Yep.
Ah.
You might have a few copies now. That's why I mentioned when you do that, it might not look like anything's changed, but it's likely that you might have, if you didn't think anything had changed, you might think you have multiple, or that you still have your original shape, but you might have multiple ones on top of each other now. And Brianna, you might want to make sure that you don't have more than two stacked on top of each other. And what you can do is click on one and delete it, click on it again and delete it, And then, keep clicking on it and deleting it. And then if you realize, you'll see when and how many copies. So, again, Craig, you had asked me earlier about the why did I hold the Option and the Shift key down, right?
Yeah.
Well, same thing to resize this. If I hold the Option and Shift key down to make this smaller, now, this time, look what happens. That shape is getting resized from the center by holding that Shift and Option key command. So it works in reverse. It works when you're drawing something out or when you're using your bounding box or scale tools just to change and transform your objects. Okay? So now, this looks kind of like a two-dimensional ring, but we know it's not quite a two-dimensional ring yet, because this is a solid filled shape on top of another solid filled shape. And white makes it harder to see, but you can always just add a little color. I'm going to add a little blue to that one and a little something to that one. And you'll see, indeed, now I have two circles on top of each other with fills on them. And then to create who remembers how would I create a ring out of this? Can anyone give me a tip on that? Anyone remember how I might create a ring with what I have here on screen? You can use the Pathfinder. Absolutely. Is that what you said too, Tom? Yep. You can use the Pathfinder. Absolutely. That's one way. I can select both of these objects, go to Window, open up my Pathfinder panel, and then by clicking on the minus front button, it'll knock that ring that's on top out of the one on the bottom. And now I truly do have a ring in 2D. Okay? That's one way to do it. I'm going to undo that for a second. The other way to do it, and I know we played around with this a couple of weeks ago, if you click on Object and then go down to Compound Path, it's going to create a compound path. It's going to basically do exactly the same thing. It's just another way. That's what compound paths are. Is a form of Pathfinder transformation. Okay. Now, sometimes I like to confirm that that is indeed a ring. This is not a solid white circle sitting on a green circle here. And to do that, and I do this all the time when I'm working, I just draw a quick shape. In this case, I drew a rectangle. I'm going to fill it with a totally different color, and I'm going to send it to the back. Anyone know the keyboard shortcut for send to back? Command. That's a tricky one. We haven't worked with that one too much. Command bracket. Left bracket sends it to the back. Right bracket sends it to the front. I know we haven't really worked with that yet, but if I click on Command and then look at the bracket, that's the one I'm talking about. It's the left bracket, which is right above the, kind of above the colon key. You can see I've sent that to back, and indeed, this is a ring. You can see my shape peeking out, and that's been completely blown out of there. So I'm going to click on my rectangle and get rid of it. I'm going to remove the stroke from my ring so that it's not getting in the way of what I want to render. So simply click on your object and then fill the stroke with none. Okay. And everyone should be pretty much at this stage. A ring with a fill and no stroke. You don't want a stroke on it because that's going to interfere. No, go ahead and delete the rectangle. The only reason I did the rectangle was just to confirm that I did indeed have a ring, that circle on top was knocked out. That's the only reason I did that, just a little visual confirmation. Okay, so now go ahead and click on your circle or your ring to select it. Okay, and like we did before, move on up to the Effect drop-down menu from the top with your object selected. Go to 3D, and this time select the Extrude and Bevel option from the 3D Effect drop-down. And you'll see that it looks very similar. The first thing you want to do, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is click on Preview. And this time, it's not revolving the object, it's extruding it. It's taking it from a flat object and pushing that two-dimensional object out to create a three-dimensional object. You can adjust how deep the depth of this extrusion is by adjusting the number of points, that is shown in the extrude depth field. Or you can click on the drop down arrow or the arrow to the right and then actually use a slider to adjust the extrusion. Okay? So now I've got this kind of, it's looking like a thick washer now. I'm going to bring it back down to around 50 so that it looks more like a ring of some type. Let's go back to 50. I'll just type that in. And you notice there's two different caps that are available to me here. If you click on, there's the solid appearance cap, which is the default. If you click on that, it actually fills your object completely solid. It's rendering like a solid object. The other one is will not cap the objects. It'll give you here it's called the hollow appearance. It depends on your object because this is also available in the Revolution or in the Revolve 3D option. But it's the same thing. It either makes it a solid or it creates a hollow effect for your object. So I'm going to go back to the solid appearance so that I get an object that looks more like a ring or a washer here. Right under the extrude depth field, you'll see that there's this bevel feature. And there are several bevels that Illustrator provides. And one of them is the rounded, you can see would probably give us a little bit of a ring effect. There's also a classic bevel. And if I click on the classic, you can kind of see this bevel that's happening here. I can change the height to accentuate that a little bit more. But I'm going to go down here and have a little fun with that rounded feature. And you can see that Illustrator is really trying to do a good job of rounding out the edge of that object to where now it's truly starting to look more like a ring. Okay? And of course you can play around with these considerably and do the cap or the complex number 1 option, which does an effect, and then more traditional Victorian might be the complex number 2. You can see sort of has this double beveled edge, and if I change the height of that, it will accentuate that bevel a little more. Yeah, you had a question back there, Colton?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Has everyone kind of gotten to where they have some sort of 3D ring rendering? Oh, that's cool. You've got a perfect ring there. It looks like a circus ring right there. And you probably did that by adjusting the depth, right, of the roundness. And you can certainly do that to manipulate your shape. So you can see here by I'm going to move my object around, and you'll see that this beveling is happening on both sides. If I move to the back side of my object, or actually now I'm in a profile, I'm going to click OK because Illustrator is trying to throw a wireframe on there. You can see that that bevel has been applied to both sides. And that's the default, that the way Illustrator handles the bevel features on 3D objects. Okay? So because I hit OK, that closed my dialog box. I can always open it back up by going to my Appearance panel and clicking on the 3D Extrude and Bevel option, and it'll open it back up. By default, again, Preview is deselected, so it's not showing me the effect, but if I click on the Preview button, it brings it right back to where it was. Yeah, did you have a question, Alicia? Okay. All right. So any questions on the differences between revolving something in 3D and extruding to create a 3D effect? Everyone kind of got that?
How do I get I guess that's back to normal, this thing.
Yeah. Oh, good question. Sometimes when you're moving your object around in 3D space, you end up getting to a position that is just not what you want. And if you try to continue manually moving it, it's just not working for you. What I usually do is click on one of the preset options, and then do something like isometric left or render it from the front to get it to where it's kind of back to a set 0 feature. Now I didn't demonstrate this perspective feature in the Revolve 3D options, but I will here. I'll go ahead and click on my position drop-down menu and select isometric left. Okay, so now I have an isometric object. And isometric basically means that all of these angles are moving at 30 degrees, right? So it's not perspective. Remember, perspective, everything tapers to a vanishing point. In isometric, all the lines are parallel. So they would, these lines would, if I extruded this infinitely deep, the lines would not taper in the distance, they would stay parallel in the distance. That's basically what isometric is, a real rudimentary definition. But you can modify that by adding perspective to your object. And you can do that here on the perspective tool, and simply by clicking and dragging this slider over, you'll see Illustrator starting to force a perspective angle, and you can really accentuate that considerably by continuing to slide that over. And now my object is really getting I'm gonna hit OK so you can kind of see what that looks like. But you can see Illustrator has now rendered some perspective. It's still the same shape, but because Illustrator is rendering this perspective, you can see these lines are now tapering towards an invisible vanishing point out here. You see they're not parallel to each other anymore. They're actually tapering in. The same way we kind of worked with the perspective tool, perspective grid tool in Illustrator. Now we're getting some of those same effects. So there's a lot you can do with these 3D shapes, as you can see, simply by playing around with both the revolve and the extrusion option. Okay. Any questions on that?
What does draw hidden faces mean as well?
Draw hidden let me open that back up. Go ahead and click on that, and what's happening is the faces that you can't see here, they're being rendered in real space. And this is helpful for when you were mapping artwork, and you'll see that in the next section. So right now Illustrator is trying to save memory by not rendering those faces that are hidden in the background. Okay? And what that does is it makes the process less complex. But by clicking on Draw Hidden Faces now, Illustrator is going through and it's actually rendering those faces on the back side of our object, even though we can't see them. There's also an option to preserve spot colors down here if you're working in something like Pantone colors or another family of spot colors. Okay, so with that, why don't we go ahead and take a break. We'll go ahead and do 10 minutes. And I think what we're going to do with this lab assignment, this might work out for you, Alicia. We'll go ahead and continue the lab assignment on Tuesday, okay? Because the time we have left, 55 minutes after the break, won't be enough time to get through the lab assignment. So the lab assignment is available in Canvas, by the way, already. But we will get started because I want you guys to kind of experience working with multiple objects in 3D space. All right, so if you guys want to be back at 7:45, I guess, that'd be great. Take a quick break. I know I need some water. Yeah, perfect. Sure. Start up the camera here. Okay. So, how do we start? What I'd like you guys to do is create a new document. And this time we're going to go landscape mode. So letter size is fine, but go ahead and orient it landscape mode by clicking on the landscape orientation button. And we're going to name this one soda can. Okay.
I'm still waiting for mine to,
Oh, did you get frozen up?
I don't know, it's saving.
Oh, okay. At least it's moving.
No, it's not moving, so I can't get to a new document.
You might want to force, were you able to force quit earlier, Cynthia? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
You just do stop.
There, looks like it's going now.
Yeah,
Okay.
stop.
Okay. All right. So everyone have a new blank document here?
Okay, what is it supposed to be?
8.5 by 11 in the landscape orientation. Okay? All right.
Do we name it anything?
So, and then you can just name it soda can. And you might want to save often so that you you don't lose your work in progress, especially as we start to 3D map the object. It's going to slow your computer down a bit. Okay, so the first place I'm going to start is if we go back to that artwork, and I'm going to switch over to artboard number 1. If we go back to this, you see I just have a solid rectangle back there. And I have, everything organized by layers. But what I'll do to start with is create that rectangle. I remember that I did something that I think was 7 inches wide by 4 inches high. So how did I get that so fast? How did I get to the rectangle tool and get this dialog box up so quick?
Double click?
You can double click on the tool itself.
Oh, no, that didn't work.
No, it needs a reference point to start with, right? So what I did is, I think I was on the pen tool previously. All I did was hit the M key, and that quickly jumped me over to the rectangle tool. You can see when I hover over the button, the rectangle tool is displayed as M for the keyboard shortcut. Then I hovered over my artboard, and I held the Option key down and clicked on the artboard. And by holding the Option key down with the shape tool, it automatically brings up the options for that shape tool. And hopefully you guys are all in inches. If you're not, you can still type in 7 IN. That will still give you 7 inches, even if you're displaying points or picas. That's fine. And then I'll move over to the height field, type in 4, and I can type in inches, and I will have a box that's filled with, that's sized to that dimension. Now that I've started this project, I'm going to name this first layer, and I'm going to name this background so that I know exactly what's on that layer. Okay. And the first thing I did was got rid of the, excuse me, got rid of the stroke color, so I'll just hit none on that. Now it looks like I have nothing on the board, but it's still filled with white. But I'm going to click on my gradient panel, and some of you guys, if you reset, well, it looks like pretty much everyone, except maybe a couple of you, still have your panels configured from the lesson we did on Tuesday, and that's okay because it helps to see the gradient panel while you're working in your other color modes. If not, that's fine as well if you're back to essentials. I'm going to click on the gradient panel and then click on the gradient button to actually apply the standard white to black gradient on that object. And you can see here, as soon as I do that in the gradient panel, it's applied that gradient, and of course I have my gradient sliders available to me. So to make that purple, I don't know exactly what color I used, but I'll double click on the leftmost button, and that'll bring up my color panel. And after doing that, I'll click on my swatches button to switch over to the swatches, and I'll just apply this purple here to that color gradient slider, if you will. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to double click this slider over here. It's going to open up my swatches panel this time. I'm going to click on that purple that's kind of bright but doesn't go fully dark there. It's really the brightest violet in there. So now you see I have a gradient that goes from purple to purple, so it looks like a solid color, right? Well, I'm going to add another.
Click on the same color again.
I clicked on the same color again. So I want to show you guys a little trick about the gradient tool that we might have not covered, at least not in class. It might have been covered in the lesson. But while So now it looks like a solid color, but indeed it is colored with a gradient that has the same gradient applied to both sliders. Now watch this. I'm going to click on, and you can click on either one. I'm going to click on the leftmost gradient slider, and then holding the Option key down, I'm going to slide that towards the middle, and you'll see that that Option key also works in the gradient slider area to create a duplicate of an existing slider. Just like you do it with shapes and lines and things like that, you can use the Option key down and click and hold it to create a gradient, another gradient slider. Yes, Robin?
How do you get rid of a second one? I accidentally got two.
Okay, good question. If you have too many sliders,
Yeah.
all you need to do is, well, what I do is I click on the slider I don't want and just drag it right off of the board. You drag it down and it disappears.
Oh, okay.
That's the quickest way to do it if you're in the gradient slider. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to Option drag one of my sliders, and you can see it creates a duplicate. Now, notice this location number here is not exactly at 50%. And what that means is 50% between 50% of the way between the leftmost to the rightmost. It's a little off because I did that manually. With my gradient slider selected, you can see it's selected because it has a black triangle on top of the color button. I'm going to highlight the location and change that to 50% and then hit enter, and that will make sure that that gradient is located right at 50%. Now, I did this so that I could modify this one in the center only. So now that I have my gradient, all three gradient sliders are exactly the same color, I'm only going to modify that middle one by making it lighter. So if you double click on it, it'll bring up the swatches panel again. This time I'm going to click over to the color panel, and I am going to watch this, guys, because I don't think we've covered this, but I am going to hold the Shift key down and click on either one, either the cyan or magenta slider, and while holding the Shift key down, I'm going to slide them left, and look what happens by holding the Shift key down. They both move in proportion to each other by holding the Shift key down. You see that? So that is one way to use the gradient tool and still remain within the same harmony color palette of your original colors. That Shift key will proportionately adjust all of the sliders. If I had a purple in there or a violet that also included yellow and black in there, those would have adjusted proportionately as well. And all I did was I slid them to the left a little bit. I'm going to go a little more. Again, I'm holding the Shift key down and I'm sliding those so that it's a lot lighter in the center than it is on the right-hand side. Okay, everyone got that? Kind of cool gradient stuff that you might have not learned from the lesson. So now I have my background is pretty much rendered the way I want it to. The next thing that I want to create are those big old circles that I had. You can see these giant circles here that I have in, oops, that's that object there, but you can see these giant circles. I keep clicking on that one layer. I'm going to lock my dots. But you can see I have all of these circles here that I created. So right now, that's all we're going to do is create some big circles, just sort of to replicate this kind of design. So if you're on your artwork, create a new layer by clicking on the New Layer button in the Layers panel. And then we can name this one Circles. And now we should be working in that one. What's the keyboard shortcut to bring up the ellipse tool?
L.
L, exactly. So I hit the L key, and it brings up my ellipse tool, and I will hold the Shift key down to constrain these perfect circles as I draw them. And feel free to draw them any way you want. I mean, this doesn't have to be exact. You can make big ones, small ones, 4, 7, 10 of them, however many you want. I wouldn't recommend using the blend tool to create multiple circles because that's going to add another layer of complexity to this artwork, and as I mentioned earlier, the more complex that it gets, the more issues you might have when rendering. So I'm going to continue to draw these circles of different sizes. I'm going to make sure that some of them overlap, and I'm going to make sure that some of them extend. And I'd ask that you do this. Make sure that some of them extend beyond the edges of your rectangle, because I want to show you the shape builder tool and how you can use that to modify your artwork. Okay, so now I have a bunch of circles filled with that same gradient that I started with. Illustrator was nice enough to remember that for me, and so that's why I ended up with all of these circles that look the same. I'm going to change that by clicking on the circles independently, going over to my swatches panel, and just picking other colors within that same sort of cool color, maybe the light, the really bright reddish violet there. This one here, the one in between, and then this one I'm going to fill with a dark purple. Feel free to use whatever colors you want here. You can actually use, you don't have to stay in this cool color palette. You can even use warm colors if you'd like. But now you see I have a bunch of circles here, and they're overlapping, and I have them at different sizes. Okay. Now to create that effect that I had in the other artwork, all I did was apply transparencies to this. And you guys are familiar with that. If you click on a circle and then open up the transparency panel, mine is located here. It's grouped with the stroke and gradient panel because of the way we configured our workspace on Tuesday. But I can click on that transparency panel and it'll bring up the transparency panel that allows me to change my options. And I can do a screen on one of these. You can go in and do a multiply. I click on another one and do an overlay. I mean, basically, I just applied a bunch of different effects to these to get some. That one has a soft light filter or effect applied, and I'll do another overlay. And you can see now we're starting to get something that's kind of fun and has a little bit of a artistic quality to it. Okay. Does everyone kind of have that going on? A bunch of circles with transparency, objects applied on a new layer. Make sure it's on a new layer so it doesn't get messed up with anything else. Okay, so I don't want these circular shapes extending beyond my, my rectangle because I'm going to be mapping this onto a surface, and I don't want these things popping up and affecting the way my artwork renders. So the simplest way to make to get rid of those extra pieces is to use the shape builder tool, and that's located in your menu bar. I have a tool panel. Sorry, I have a 2-column tool panel set up. You might have the 1-column, but basically the shape builder tool looks like this. It sort of has 2 circles kind of stacked on top of each other with a little arrow overlapping the larger circle. If you click on the shape builder tool, it'll give you the shape builder option, and when you hover over your object, this one I happen to have selected. I want it to be deselected, sorry. So I'm going to hold the command key down and click away from my circle, and that's right, I have to have both of my objects selected. Bear with me, guys. So let me show you where I want to be. Your shape builder tool will not work if you don't have an object selected. And so what I want to do is select my rectangle in the background and one of the circles that extends beyond the edges. And now when I hover over one of the pieces, or any of the pieces, you see it sort of highlights with this little bit of a grid pattern. And everyone should be seeing that.
How do you select the second one again?
Shift key.
Shift?
Again, the shift key will select multiple objects.
It's making my box go up.
Yeah, if you click and drag it, it will move. So you can see now that I have both of these objects selected, the shape builder tool is identifying and recognizing that all of these can be knocked out of each other. Well, I just want to knock out this one piece that's hovering over or extended beyond the edge of my rectangle. And so if I click on that and with the Shape Builder tool, it will have created a splice of that shape based on its overlap with that original rectangle. And you can see that there's this selected line going across there to indicate that indeed it did make that split. If I go back to my selection tool,
Oh, that's what mine is.
if you go back to the selection tool and click on that piece now, you can select it and then delete it. And you'll see that the Shape Builder made a nice cutaway from there. I didn't have to use the pathfinders and all of that stuff. I just did that simply with the Shape Builder tool. So I have a few more to go. And so for those of you that maybe are still trying to catch up, you can see the same process on the next couple of shapes. I'm going to zoom in this time because that one piece is is overhanging that pretty small. So I want to be in a little bit tighter. So again, I'm going to work on this one that's really small here. This little tiny piece I want to get rid of. So I select my circle with the selection tool. Holding the Shift key down, I also select my rectangle so that both shapes are now selected. Then I click on my Shape Builder tool and I can start hovering around, and you'll see that Illustrator is ready to split those pieces up depending on which ones I click. And so I'm going to click on this little piece that I want to get rid of, and it's going to create a separate knockout of that piece that can be deleted. Whoops, all of my shapes were still selected. I have to go back to the selection tool, click away from all of my shapes, and then click on that one single piece, and now I can delete that. Okay, we have one more to go. By the third one, you guys should be pretty caught up.
I'm
So-
using a whole box.
So you might have it selected though, Robin, so undo to where your box comes back. So again, the key here, and Robin, you have to remember this, deselect stuff, because if you have something selected and you start hitting the delete key, obviously it's going to delete that piece. So what you want to do is make sure nothing is selected. I'm going to click on my last circle, and then holding the Shift key down, I'm going to click on that rectangle. And you can see that now my rectangle and my circle are selected. I'm going to go back to the Shape Builder tool and hover over that last piece, click on it, then deselect everything, because if I hit delete right now, it still has my big rectangle and the rest of my circle selected. What's the keyboard shortcut to deselect everything? Does anyone remember the keyboard shortcut to... Close. Yeah, it's three keys. It's Command-Shift-A. Command-Shift-A is the keyboard shortcut for deselect everything. Okay? So now everything is nothing, or I should say nothing is selected. I can go back to my selection tool, click on that little piece that I knocked out with my Shape Builder, and get rid of that. And now I have no artwork extending beyond the edges of my rectangle. All right? Everyone kind of caught up there? Should have something like what you see here. All right, let me jump over to my cheat sheet over here, the soda label, and see what's next. Oh, these cool dots. Some of you guys are really going to like this for the grunge effect that those dots can give you. So now I have this artwork. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to name this one Dots. Okay. So how did I get those dots? Of course, I didn't create those. Illustrator has symbols that look like that, and you can find those by clicking on the symbols, by opening your Symbols panel. That's one way. And again, the Symbols panel is the one that looks like a little clover leaf. And if you don't have your Symbols panel available on your panels, all you need to do is go to Window from the drop-down menu and check Symbols so that it's available to you. Okay? So the symbol I want to use for this is part of a library that comes with Illustrator. I remember when we were doing the pattern work, some of you guys really got into these symbols. You remember how there's quite a few in there, right? Illustrator has a lot of symbols available to use for you to use in your designs. And you can get to those, if you have the symbols panel open, you can get to those by clicking on the symbol library menu button, and it pops up the entire menu of different libraries that are available to you. That particular texture that I used came from the dot pattern vector pack. So go ahead and click on the dot pattern vector pack, and it should bring up the panel that is that has all of these cool little dot patterns that can add texture to the design of your artwork. The one that I used is this one here that's called Dot Pattern Vector Pack number 11. I think that's the one I used. And you can bring that symbol to your artboard by clicking on the symbol itself and, of course, dragging it to your artboard, and you'll see we end up with yeah, that's the one, pretty much, the dots. Well, it's a little big, right? I'm going to get a little precise here. I'm not just going to use the scale tool even the bounding box to resize this. The first thing I'm going to do is zoom out just a little bit so I can see more of it, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. For this I will use the bounding box. You can see when I hover near the corner of my object, a little revolve arrow appears. My icon changes into that revolve arrow. If I then click while holding the shift key down, I can rotate that 45-degree angles to where I get it to where it's a 90-degree rotation, where it's heavier dot pattern on the left going to a lighter dot pattern on the right. Okay. Now I want this to be the exact same height as my rectangle back there. Who remembers how tall that rectangle was?
7?
It's 7 inches. 4 inches. Did everyone do a 4-inch tall rectangle?
Yes.
If you didn't do a 4-inch tall rectangle, you'll have to remember what size you did, because to make this exactly the same height using the transform tools, you'll have to punch in the digits. So my transform tools are not available to me because my monitor is a little bit too small. But if I click on the transform button, you can see, and you guys probably do see the transform options already in your control panel. But if I click on mine, you'll notice that I can change the width and the height of this. And you want to make sure that your link button is selected so that when you make a transformation, it applies that transformation proportionately to all sides. And so if your link button is not checked, it's going to look like a broken link here. You can see that icon looks like a little link that's broken. Now if I make a change to one parameter, the other one will not change. But that's not what I want. I'm going to click on that to make it so that both of these elements are linked, and I'm going to change the height of my symbol to 4. And now I know that it is exactly the same height as my circle. Okay. Now I want these to be perfectly aligned. Let me zoom back in. I'm going to hit Command 0 to fit my artboard. I want to make sure that both of these elements are my rectangle in the background and my symbols in the foreground are perfectly aligned, stacked right on top of each other, with the left edge aligned as well. To do that, while my symbol is selected, I'm going to hold the Shift key down and click on my rectangle in the background. Okay? So now both of those objects are selected. You can see here I have my alignment options that appear, but it's not quite right yet. Because if I hit align, and by default, or at least for me, align to artboard has been selected. If I were to align these now, both of these objects would flush over to whatever side I align them to, and they would both, move to fit along the edge of the artboard. That's not what I want. I want my symbol to align with my rectangle. All I need to do to get there is, with both of them selected, I simply click one time on my rectangle and make that the key object. And you can see, we covered key object alignment a couple of weeks ago, but you can see I now have a heavy blue line around the edge of that artwork. And that is my key object. And you can see my symbol has now changed to the key object alignment option here in my control panel. You guys can see that it has a little key inside of it, as a matter of fact. So now any alignment options that I apply, everything, this is going to, the rectangle in the back is going to serve as my, the object that everything aligns to. So I'm going to first click the horizontal left align and then the vertical top align button. And that is going to ensure that my symbol is sitting right on top of my object. And because I made it 4 inches high, I know that it's exactly the same height. So nothing is extending beyond the edges of my artwork. Okay, everyone, can I have that? I know I belabored that process, but it's a little tricky, and I wanted to review the alignment and key align. And Sean, you got that going? You're all right on how to get to this stage right here?
Totally spaced that, sorry.
All right. Anyone else? Any questions on this so far? Okay. So I went through that process. Of course, we could have used the bounding box to scale that symbol and zoomed in and snapped to the corners. But I wanted to show you guys that you can also use the transform tools to make sure that you are spot on precise. You know, absolute numbers. There's no question that this artwork is perfectly stacked on top. So this symbol is still a symbol, and I don't want it to be, because I want to mountify the colors. I want to do a whole bunch of stuff to it. And so I'm going to turn this into a vector object all by itself. And to do that, I'm going to click on this break link button up here that appears when I click. You have to click on it, of course. You have to click on your symbol. And if you click on this break link button, it's going to break the link from that symbol so that now this is a vector object, or a series of vector objects that are fully editable all by themselves. Don't click away from them. Keep them selected, okay? Because if you click away, this is not a grouped object. Who remembers the keyboard command for grouping in Illustrator? Command G. You got those down, huh, Cynthia? Command G will group all of those dots together. I wanted to do that so that now when I click on it, it moves as a unit, even though there's a bunch, hundreds of tiny dots making this up. Now, I'm going to undo a couple of steps and show you that indeed this symbol was not grouped. I'm going to break the link again. I'm going to click away from my dots. And now when I click on one of those dots and I try to move the whole thing, all of these dots are completely independent. That's not what I wanted. And that's why I had you guys group this object before you deselected it. Okay? So let me go back to my symbol instance, break the link, group it before I deselect anything by hitting Command G. And again, you can also group by going under the object drop-down menu and selecting Group. And now all of my objects are grouped. Or whatever changes I apply, I can just click on it one time and they will all be selected. All I did for the effect that I had going on over there was I filled all of those dots with white. So now we have a bit of a white dot pattern on top. And then, of course, I adjusted the transparency of those down to give it a more subtle dot effect. And I don't know exactly what I used, but I kind of like 10%. I don't want that pattern to be too gaudy and overwhelming on my design. So 10 or 20% is probably going to yield some results that are nice and subtle. Okay? Everyone caught up there? Got that? Any questions on this so far? No? Okay. Great. let's see if we can get through our artboard. Oh, and by the way, everyone probably has a file named soda can. I have soda-can. Let's go ahead and hit Command S, because we might not have time to do the 3D portion of this. I want to make sure we can pick up on Tuesday. So go ahead and hit Command S and save this in your labs folder, and you can keep that name, soda can. I'm just going to save that in there as soda can. Sorry I didn't have you guys save earlier, but hopefully no one lost any artwork. But do save now. Be sure to do that, because as this artwork gets more complex, we may, you may start to get your computer to hang up. So go ahead and save. Let's see what we have left here. On my design over here, I have this text that appears to be transformed. And indeed, I applied a warp filter to that. And then I have some little white dots that kind of look like a grape shape. Not really, but I thought of grape when I was doing this purple label. And so let's go ahead and do that. By selecting your type tool, actually first, let me close this extra panel that was rolled out in my layers. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to name this one text, T-E-X-T. Okay. It's, who has a yellow layer here? You can tell it's yellow because of that little preview color that I get. Does everyone else have yellow as well?
Yeah.
I don't like working with yellow layers because sometimes they're hard to see. That yellow line is so light. So I'm going to double click on that layer and change it to red. Red's actually my favorite. Oftentimes I make all of my layers red, just, because the colors aren't always that critical to me. So I'll make this one red, and I'll close my dot pattern vector pack panel because I don't need any more symbols. I've created my symbol. I'll go ahead and close my symbols panel as well, just so it's not in the way when I zoom in a little bit. I'm going to zoom in one time so that my artwork's a little bit bigger. And the font that I use for this design is one that we should all have on our systems. It's basically Myriad Pro, which is one of the default fonts that Illustrator comes with. And you can just go ahead and click on your artwork to start typing. Now, some of you guys, if you're not careful, you might accidentally click on one of your circles, and you've noticed that when I hover over the edge of my circle, my icon changes to the area type symbol here. I don't want that. I don't want to type inside of my object. I want to type outside of it. Okay? So I'm going to move to a position where it's not the area type tool, and I can just click one time and I get a little type line. And by default, this should be Myriad Pro, colored black, set in 12 points. And that's indeed what I have. So you can name your soda whatever you want. I'm going to name mine Fizz Up again with no space, capital F, capital U. And once I'm done, you notice I clicked back onto the selection tool. And I clicked on the selection tool because whenever you're done, whenever you finish typing in Illustrator, if you click on the selection tool, even while you're in type mode, Illustrator will select your entire type object, whether this is line type here, but if it was area type, it would select that entire object. And I want that selected because I want to continue to modify this text. I'm going to open my character panel. Yours might be open already in the control panel here because your window's a little bit larger. But I'm going to click on my control panel to open that up, and I'm going to change my points to, I think, 72 is what I had. And if I type in 72 and then hit the tab key, I notice it's getting close. And that's fine, I'll leave it at 72. But I am going to change the font weight to bold, and I can do that by simply typing. You notice that when I clicked inside, there's two ways. Of course, I can use the drop down and select it, but also you can select the text inside of the field. And if I simply start typing bold, when I hit the B command, you notice Illustrator immediately fills this in with the next option of whatever matched the character that you typed. And in this case, I don't want bold condensed, so I'm going to go back to that drop-down arrow to select bold from the menu so that indeed I get bold as my text. The spacing is a little excessive here, so I'm going to change the tracking on this text to like a -30. I don't like the space that, especially between the F and the I there. So I'm going to do a -30 tracking adjustment by typing -30 in the tracking field, and then I hit enter, and that's a little better. Now the Z is a little bit tight. Of course, you can go in and kern these so that Z's are wider apart, and kern it so that the I is closer. But you know, we're going to be warping this, so it really doesn't matter, right? We're going to be warping it anyway, so you don't have to get so critical with your kerning and tracking at this stage. All right. The warp option. All you need to do is create a warp envelope by clicking on the Make Envelope button here with your type selected. Of course, I'm going to cancel out of that. You can see my line type here is selected, and when I have that selected, you should be able to click on the Make Envelope button, and it'll bring up the Warp Options dialog box. Again, one of the first things I do. You got it, Megan?
Where did you give me?
Your type needs to be selected, and then
That little one.
it's called the Make Envelope. When you hover over it, it's called the Make Envelope. You say tomato, I say tomato. And when you click on that, it should bring up the dialog box. Is anyone not getting that?
I got it.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know it was at the top.
Oh yeah, it's in the control panel there. Might be in a slightly different position on your screen, but on mine, it's right up here. And you can see it's kind of has an arc applied to it already to remind you that that's where the warp options are. And we've played around with this tool before. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, the first thing you want to do is hit the preview button whenever any of these open up. And you'll see immediately the default style is the arc, and so that's what's been applied to my text. I can change that by switching over to Rise, and I think that's the one that I used in my design. You can feel free to use any of the others that you might on your artwork. This is, we're just going to use this as our base artwork, and then we'll change it as we, you can make this your own artwork. So I'm going to hit OK to apply that warp feature to the text. But I realized, wait a minute, if I go back to my original design, my text was white, it wasn't black. Holy moly. How do I adjust that? Well, you notice here, with my object selected, I can't change the fill of that text, even if I modify this, or I attempt to apply the fill. Because what's happening is Illustrator has this permanently transparent envelope effect being applied to this text. But the text is still editable. You just have to get to it. And if you notice up in the upper left-hand corner here, you'll see there are two funky new buttons that appeared because we're in this envelope warping feature. One is to edit the envelope itself, and the other is to edit the contents of the envelope. If you click on the Edit Contents button, now you notice our line type is editable again, and I can apply white to that text, and indeed it will change the color, and you can continue to work on it. You can apply effects to it, drop shadows if you want. Whatever you want to apply to it, you can now modify that artwork if you'd like to use some of the live effects tools to do that. Just bear in mind, we're going to be mapping this artwork to a 3D object, so some of those effects might not render the way you want them to. So now we've got an object that we can really starting to look like what we had originally. I'm going to click on the Edit Envelope button again to go back to the standard method of working with this object. And by clicking on the Edit Envelope button, now I can move this around into a position, a little off center from my circles. Using the bounding box, you can kind of further distort this envelope warp effect that's been applied to my text, and there's all sorts of stuff that you can do within this mode. Does anyone know how I would go back and change the type of warp that's been applied? Any ideas? Because right now I have a flag warp. What if I wanted an arc?
You go to the style in the top where it says rise, and then you click on it.
There's the shortcut right there. So mine, I thought I had flag applied. It's actually the rise one. Yeah. Once you're in this envelope warp mode, your control panel, as it always does, right? It always changes to give you the options that are relevant to the tool that you're working in, or the effects that you're working in. And so, yeah, you can just click on the arch, the arc, and then, but personally I like the rise, so I'll stick with that. So we're pretty close to what I had in this original artwork. Of course, you can decorate yours with dots if you'd like. Maybe the dots would be more appropriate. The white dots would be more appropriate over the eye. So, I'll just add a few little circles here over my eye. Nothing fancy.
Now, how are you doing that?
How am I copying them?
Oh, you copied them?
I created a circle and then I just click and drag with the Option key to create copies of that. Okay?
Oh, you just created a regular old circle?
Yeah, just a regular old circle. And I left that on my text layer because that's kind of part of my, my text, if you will. So we've got a couple of minutes left, so with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up the label on here. And all I did was, obviously, I have some text along the edge that I simply rotated. I typed it out, fun and fizziness. So I clicked on my artwork, and then I typed fun and fizziness. Then clicking on your selection tool will select your line type. And if you have your bounding box available, you can simply scale the size by holding the Shift key down. And again, the Shift key is going to constrain the proportions. That's important. And then still using the bounding box, you notice if I hover close enough to one of those corners, I get that revolve arrow icon to appear. And again, holding the Shift key down, I'll click and rotate that around so that it's now running vertically as line type. Okay? I'm going to fill that with white, and our artwork is now pretty much ready to be mapped to our object when we get back on Tuesday. Go ahead and save your file, and we'll continue where we left off on Tuesday to get into some of the mapping stuff. If you want to jump ahead so that you feel totally 100% comfortable and confident with what we're going to be doing Tuesday, you can jump into that lesson. Again, I think it was lesson 12, and you'll go through the same process with even a fancier looking soda can using the revolve features of Illustrator's 3D stuff. All right. Again, I look forward to seeing your designs on Tuesday. Please let me, I'll be here for a few minutes if you have any questions about production questions on how to mount it. I do recommend that you mount your logo on a separate black paper than your business card. Okay, that way, otherwise they'll just look too crowded. Might not even fit. I don't know if it might be a little too crowded if you mount them all on one. So again, the presentation's up to you. This is all part of what you're going to be, how you want your portfolio to look. Okay? Any questions on this stuff? All right. Well, have a great weekend, And yeah, we'll see you guys on. I'll see you guys on Tuesday. The proverbial we.